individuals are participate in this 3-month training and internship and learn about these programs, and then also learn about institutional capacities for a grassroots NGO. And then after this initial training period, they're accompanied to start their own community-based organization, which is essentially a grassroots NGO in their community. And then funding for this organization is provided by the foundation, and that helps them to get their organization started and have staff to carry out their programs and to carry out their essential functions. So this is basically a what would you call it? Sort of a depiction of the institutional capacities that the foundation is trying to help these organizations to develop. So at the core is really these main capacities. One is the capacity to develop a conceptual framework. So defining what is the space that their organization would like to work in, what are their values, what are the principles that guide their work, what are the methods they use for carrying out their work, and what are the convictions that really inform the way they approach development. So one of the first steps is that the organization develops its own framework for action. And then it looks at the society around it and sees what is the reality of our community, what are its strengths, what are its challenges, what are its resources, and then it forms a vision of what might be possible in its community. And then it works to translate that vision into a program. So based on its reading of its situation, it identifies a program that can help its community in some way. And then it implements that program in a learning mode. So what this really means, I'm sure it's familiar to all of you in Silicon Valley, is really iterating, like starting with something simple and then reflecting on experience and modifying and improving over time. So there's this constant process of action and reflection and modification of the program based on experience in the field. So those are the core capacities that the foundation's training tries to develop in the NGOs that we're working with. And then there's also other essential capacities that are in the outer ring, which include raising up and deploying human resources. So over time, the NGOs will hire additional staff, usually beginning with program staff and then expanding into things like accounting and finance and fundraising as the organization matures. There's also, of course, very important in China is forming and maintaining relationships with government and civil society. So there's some training materials that are focused on helping the organizations to develop relationships with government in the local setting, and then developing and managing financial resources. So there's basically a pretty comprehensive training program that's built around these 7 capabilities. And the program itself is modified over time. As the NGOs gain experience in the field, they're generating a lot of learning and a real wealth of knowledge about these different aspects of NGOs' capacity. So those lessons are gradually incorporated into the training materials over time. So currently, the Dadi Foundation is collaborating with 25 of these community-based organizations, and they're located in 11 provinces in China.
What's meaning CBO?
CBO is a community-based organization, so we can kind of use it interchangeably with NGO or CBO. Any other questions at this point?
Why is it different color?
Different color. I think this was just stylistic. It's
okay.
No significance yet. But it is the CBOs. Some of them are using a program that works with rural women, and some of them are using a program that works with youth between the ages of 12 and 15. So there are 2 kind of broad groupings of CBOs that we're working with.
So what's your plan for the programs not covered?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the immediate plan is not to expand a lot at this stage. The idea is really improving the quality of the programs that are implemented by the CBOs and learning how to more effectively accompany them. But down the road, I think that there is possibility for expansion into other provinces. But at this stage, it's interesting. A lot of the CBOs are grouped in one or another province. So for example, Yunnan, there are quite a few. I think there are 6 or 7 CBOs there. And often that's because one or two will start, and then others will learn about this opportunity through them, and then they'll have a few more start out of the first one. So at this stage, it's sort of just in these 11 provinces. And down the road, there may be some possibility of expanding into others.
Like, how did you choose this, like, province, not others? Like, what's your,
Yeah, it's a very good question. Part of it kind of is organic. It emerges from where resources are who would like to start a CBO. And that kind of happens through relationships. So we have a number of staff in the Beijing office, and they might be from one of these provinces and introduce it to a family member, and they start a CBO. And then that's actually happened in Ningxia. There was one staff member in our Beijing office who introduced the opportunity to serve in this way to her family member, and then she introduced it to her uncle, and then to her aunt, and so on. So it ended up being that there were quite a few CBOs in that province. And then, but the main focus is really looking at rural or semi-rural and less economically developed areas of China. That's kind of the underlying selection criteria, which of course there are others that we haven't expanded into yet that fall into that category as well.
Could you elaborate, please, that how do you select the spots and how deep do you go into those rural areas or how remote they are?
Yeah.
That's question number one. Number two is that did you run into any peer NGOs there? For example, Yunnan has the most NGOs right now in China. And do you work with them together there, or how does the relationship?
That's a good question. I'm thinking that the first question may be addressed a bit more as I go through the presentation and share a bit more about what the NGOs are actually doing. But on the second question, the philosophy of both the foundation and the NGOs we're working with is really that development is a very complex project, and it really requires universal participation. So the orientation towards other civil society organizations is really one of cooperation and drawing on mutual strengths to solve some challenges in the rural areas. I mean, there is a certain level of looking at whether we're like-minded in the approach to development. So for example, at the beginning, you mentioned that we collaborate with the Poverty Alleviation Bureau at the national level of China, and that's been very fruitful because they have identified as a priority the self-development capacity of rural populations, which what the foundation is trying to do is very consistent with that. So generally, if there's some kind of like-mindedness, that's kind of the key criteria for partnership. But that's both at the national level and also at the local level for the community-based organizations. So this is a brief diagram showing the relationship between Batty Foundation and the CBOs. So as mentioned before, the foundation provides some funding to the grassroots organizations and also the programmatic support. But it's really a relationship of reciprocal learning. So the insights that are gained by each organization at the grassroots really inform the foundation's programs. So a lot of the CBOs are actually working with schools in rural areas of China. So there's been a lot that's been learned about how to work effectively with young people in a school setting, how they can look at education in a way that's beyond just intellectual education, but including how to contribute to your community, how students can be mobilized to do service in their community. And so as these experiences are gained by each CBO, we can sort of see patterns that emerge, and then those are shared by the foundation between different CBOs. And also, a more recent development is that the CBOs have themselves begun to form regional groups where they come together every 6 months, and they have a few topics they would like to share about and discuss that they've been gaining experience in, and they will study and talk about their challenges, provide support to each other, and share their learning together. So it used to be that Batty Foundation would organize these kinds of seminars, but now it's the CBOs themselves that are organizing their spaces for learning with each other. So this is a case study of one of the CBOs, which is in Dehong in Yunnan province. And the founder of the CBO is named Mo Ting. This is her picture. The name of the CBO is the Yingxin Harmonious Community Center, and it was established in 2008. And it's implementing the program that's working with rural women, which is called the Environmental Action Program. And Mo Ting started doing the Environmental Action Program training in Shangang, Xiangzun in 2012. So there's just a little bit about the village. It's in Dehong Autonomous Prefecture in Yunnan Province. And so it's a small village with 104 villagers and 24 households. And all of the women in the village were engaged in agriculture. So during the day, they were quite busy in the fields and with other activities. But they saw this study of this program as being so important that they met every night from 8:30 to midnight for 10 nights in a row to complete the study. And it's really looking at, the program is looking at concepts of the role of farmers in society, the importance of agriculture, the importance of the equality of women and men, the need for consultative decision making, that everyone's voice is heard and people participate actively in making decisions in their village, the importance of investigating truth for yourself and not just following superstition. And then there's another level of the training that's focusing more on concepts of sustainable development in agriculture. So it's kind of building confidence and heightened consciousness of the importance of contributing to your community, and then also providing some tools to do so. So, and it's participatory education. It's small groups of people studying together and sharing their insights and learning from each other. And it has an action component. So after each study session, the participants will think about something they can do for their community to make it better.
Can you elaborate also here that what is the gender ratio for this 104 people there, and what's their education background, participation level, and stuff like that?
Yes, this, I don't have the level of detail of information about that, but I could ask if I can find that and maybe get your contact information after. So my work is actually more on the Macau side of the program, so I unfortunately can't share that level of detail, but I think actually the majority of the participants in the program are women, and this is in part because a lot of the men have left the rural communities to go to the cities, but also that the program intentionally focuses on women because it sees it as them as being very capable and important contributors to the development of their communities. So it was really focusing on the potential that's in this population as well. So typically, for the program as a whole, it's about 90 to 95% of the participants are women.
Question.
Sure.
So for the program, what to be discussed or taught, is that a fixed agenda, or is that a program that's developed sort of a curriculum, or is that a sort of the self-initiated?
So there is a structure of a curriculum, but it's meant to be studied in a participatory way. So there might be a few paragraphs of content, it might be a case study, or a discussion of some concepts, like looking at different forms of leadership, for example. There's one section that looks at like an authoritarian form of leadership, or and then it goes through these different models, and then there will then be a series of discussion questions that help the participants to reflect on, what is the kind of leadership that's needed in their community, and what are some things to avoid, or what things that are striving to develop. So it's a balance between having some structure and content, but then not being too rigid that it doesn't allow for people's own ideas to come out.
All the leaders going through abandoned training, or like I'm just wondering how you make sure that the leaders kind of inject your core value there, or maybe they have their own idea of how leadership should be, and they kind of just voice their own value.
Yeah.
How that.
So that's interesting. There have been some leaders, I don't know that they have necessarily gone through the training, but they often will observe it. They want to know what's happening in these seminars and in these training sessions. And I think what they see is the changes in the participants. Like I remember there was one leader in particular who was saying that they were really the participants really changed a lot from being maybe less engaged in the life of the community to really taking the initiative and leading the community to contribute to its betterment. So I think what happens in that case is that indirectly, it's often through the changes in the participants and the leaders seeing that they become maybe more interested in the ideas that underlie the program. And then, so there's the CDO that's working in that community, and they will often have conversations and meetings regularly with the leaders, and it's more of an informal conversational approach at this stage to sharing these ideas with the leaders in the community. So you'll remember back at one of the earlier slides where we talked about the 7 capabilities of the organization. One of them is developing relationships with local government. So there's kind of an ongoing conversation between the CDO and the local government about the concepts. So in this case of Yingxing, they did some training in this village. The participants studied in the evening after their agricultural responsibilities, and they started to do action planning based on the needs in their community. And so what we find often is that things start simply at the beginning, and then it develops confidence, it develops an energy, because oftentimes a few of the participants will undertake an action in the community, and then others from the broader community will come in and help. And it also skills. It develops skills of how to communicate with each other, how to make decisions, and how to improve over time. So in this case, the participants made a plan to clean the village by uprooting weeds by the side of the road. And like I mentioned, more people from the community came in and participated and helped, and so this was a good positive first step, and they found that there was more harmonious family and neighbor relationships in this village. So next, the participants identified that the road in their village wasn't paved. It was a dirt road, so whenever it would rain, it would become muddy and more difficult to travel on this road and very messy. And so they approached the township government to have a paved asphalt road in their village, but it was refused by the government because the town was too small. So the participants, because actually part of the kind of spiritual concepts and qualities that are developed in the program, it includes like courage and perseverance and not giving up. So they decided not to give up and to find the money themselves to pave the road in the village. So there were many challenges that they encountered in trying to raise the funds. Initially, someone committed some funds and then they backed out, but they eventually were able to raise the money and hired a contractor to pave the asphalt road going into their village. And then after this, they undertook some more projects, which included adding a trash site, a public toilet, an activity room, and a place where they could carry out cultural activities, some dancing activities in their village. So this gradually emerged from this group of participants in the program with the accompaniment and support of the CDO. And what's been also very nice to see is that they're now local facilitators of the environmental action program that are coming out of the initial group of participants in this village. And so oftentimes we see that these sorts of initiatives are the first kinds of initiatives that start. It could be environmental cleanup projects or infrastructure projects, and then many of them have gone on to undertake economic projects, identifying crops that can generate more household income, and looking at ways that this knowledge can be spread more broadly in the community so it doesn't benefit just a few people, but really raises the overall economic level of the community. And that goes back to the concept of balanced development, that it's both material and spiritual. So the spiritual values really encourage that the benefits of development don't just go to a few people, but really are spread widely in the community. So this is just one of the basic concepts that I think these stories illustrate, is that the participants become protagonists. They're seeing what their village needs, and they're taking initiative to meet those needs and overcoming challenges and being very resourceful in the process. And then the idea is also that the programs are trying to build capabilities, which include, it's not just skills, but it includes knowledge, like knowledge of agriculture, knowledge of best practices in decision making, and then information, skills, habits, attitudes, like persevering, and spiritual qualities. All these have to come together to create the capacity to contribute to the development. And again, the idea is that capacity grows organically. So it's not something that happens overnight or right away. It's something where by taking a small step and then building on it, it can gradually emerge. And this is just about the coherence between the material and spiritual aspects of life. So the goal is really that in whatever action is taken, the CBOs are thinking about spiritual implications. So what impact would this technology have on the social relationships in our community? How would this development project impact the environment? Are we being just and fair towards others in our village? So these are all things that the CBOs have identified as being a very important consideration as development advances in their community.
I'm just curious, this is your rep there, right, in the picture?
Our what?
This lady in the picture,
Uh-huh.
is that your representative?
This is one of the staff in our Beijing office. Yeah.
So how local is this person? I mean, for example, language-wise, I know you guys communicate in probably Chinese, but how about dialects and the people that understand everything she talk about?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So she's from, she speaks Putonghua, and then in terms of working with the direct villagers, there can be a language issue because there are different dialects in many of these communities. But the founders of the CDOs, almost, I think all of them, they speak their local dialect as well as Putonghua. So they're able to communicate with the Dadi Foundation staff in China, but then they're also able to communicate with local people in their community using the dialect and have the.
So I'm curious about her report back to the organization in terms of coherence between the material and the spiritual aspect. What's her observation and what kind of report did you see?
From the local organizations?
Yeah.
It ranges. Like a lot of the reporting initially tends to be stories, anecdotes of initiatives that the local participants have taken in the program. There's also statistical reporting, how many participants they've had in their program during the year, how many trainings they've carried out, how many villages they've worked with, how many government agencies they've visited. And then over time, the goal is that the more mature organizations will have a more formal aspect of evaluation. So they will start to use, some of them have started to use like simple questionnaire surveys pre and post to assess the evaluation of the impact of the program. But it's really a spectrum. There's some organizations that are very early and the reports are relatively simple, and then there's others that are engaging in more formal and sophisticated evaluation processes.
Question. So in your presentation, you mentioned I would say the typical structure for each of the this CBO. So you have so those women in that village spend 10 nights intensity study the material. So is that all what they do in spreading all these material? After they finish this village, they move on to another village, or they actually involve more activities like building the road?
Yeah, it's a good question. So usually it's different in different villages from what I understand, but usually the practice is there's several levels of the environmental action program study materials. So initially they would study the first level, and then they would undertake some action in the community, and then they would move on to the second level. So the first level is more focused on, you could say, the spiritual aspects of development, decision-making, relationships, personal qualities that are needed for development. And then the second level moves on to sustainable agricultural practices, like looking at ecological balance and the impact of different technologies on the environment and so on. And then there's a new course that's being piloted that's about small-scale economic development projects, because that's been an area where some of the CBOs have gained experience and were able to move on a bit further. So it's generally it'll be in that order, and then they'll work with usually a smaller pool of people at the beginning, and they'll usually stay with the same village for a longer period of time, because like was mentioned at the beginning, the vision is like a long-term process of development. So they'll continue working with the participants as they do more and more complex things, moving from environmental cleanup to economic projects. But the vision here, I think the question you asked before was about expanding in different provinces. At the local level, the goal of these CDOs is to gradually reach more and more of the population with their training program. And so the idea is that from the initial participants in their training activities, that more people can be raised up who can themselves be facilitators and then offer the program to more and more people in the community. So at the local level, there is this goal to reach a larger number. But the actual program itself is in ongoing development. So there is going to be a need for more materials addressing different needs down the road.
You mentioned that add one new trash site for this location, which implies that they probably don't have anything like that before. And do you know how the local self-regulations or self-governance look like there?
That I don't know. Although I have seen, in my limited experience in rural areas, that in some cases, some kind of a ravine or something is used for trash. So I think there might be regulations, but they're not always followed. And again, I think that goes back to kind of the spiritual and material balance, that our physical environment has a great impact on us. And I think that was probably coming out of the recognition of the participants that they wanted to have a more beautiful and clean physical environment. So I mentioned earlier that there's two programs that the CDOs carry out. The first was what we were just looking at, the Environmental Action Program. And the second is called the Moral Empowerment Through Language Program. And so the first program focuses on rural women, and this program focuses on youth aged 12 to 15. And the reason that it focuses on that age group is because that's a very special period in a person's life. You're no longer children, but you're also not yet an adult. And starting to think about profound ideas and to think about their role in the world and what they'd like to do with their life. And so this program is an English language program that also helps junior youth to develop their moral structure and powers of expression. So a concept that's really fundamental in this program is that one's purpose in life is to develop your talents and capacities and use them for the benefit of your community and your country and the world as a whole. So the program uses a series of language texts. Each one has kind of a story of a young person somewhere in the world. And as the junior youth read through these stories, they also have language activities to develop their vocabulary in English and the power of expression in the English language. So the CDOs that are implementing this program, they work with local middle schools in mainly rural communities in China. And oftentimes the middle schools will allow time during the school day for the CDOs to do this program. And the main elements of the program are study of these language texts, and then also service to the community and sports and social activities. And the idea is that the junior youth form kind of a positive group that is thinking about meaningful topics and thinking about how they can help their community and supporting each other in that process. And usually there's an older youth or young adult who works with each group of junior youth to guide them in this process of study and service.
With only 24 households there, it's hard to imagine that there are own local schools.
Oh, this is different communities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this one actually is in Lijiang. This is the example of a community-based organization that's in Lijiang in Yunnan province. And they're working with a local middle school in their context. And I'll just share some brief pictures from this program, and then maybe we can watch the video, which will give a bit more sense of both of the programs that have been mentioned. So this is actually the staff of the CDO that's working with junior youth in Lijiang. And they work in the classrooms of the local school, and an important element is the study of these texts through which junior youth are helped to think about meaningful ideas like service to their community, about what are their talents and how they can use them in their life and in service to their community. And then also it's kind of a light atmosphere. There's cooperative games, there's interactive study to help move away from the dynamic of a teacher lecturing to the class, but more of the students working together to learn and advance their own understanding. Cooperative games in the classroom, and then service activities. And the encouragement is really that the junior youth themselves identify what they would like to do for service. That it's not because they're being told what to do, but rather they see a need in the community and they see how they can help to address that need, and they take action on that basis. So this is just a small example of one service activity. This is near Dali in Yunnan province. And the junior youth in this school went back to their village on the weekend, and they saw that the village toilet was very dirty. And so they decided that they would organize a project to clean this bathroom. And so this was a few weeks in the making for them to organize all the cleaning products and how to do it. And finally, one weekend they went and they began to clean. And they were very organized, but one of them was reflecting that as she was in there, because the bathroom was so dirty, she began to feel sick. And so she left and didn't want to continue, but then her classmates encouraged her to continue and to persevere. And so she went back in, and she was reflecting afterwards that overcoming that hardship was really something that gave her confidence, and that she realized that there's a lot of joy in service to the community. So although I think some of these activities may appear simple at first, at this age group they can have really a profound effect on the thinking and consciousness of junior youth. So the service component of the program is very important. This is what you can see a much cleaner bathroom than how it was originally. So just a brief recap is that, so the Badi Foundation assists people from rural areas to start their own CBOs and provides some training and financial resources for them to function. And the one thing that's been really wonderful is in the last couple of years, as mentioned earlier, the CBOs have formed their own regional groups where the same CBOs that are in the same province or adjoining provinces will come together and study and help each other to develop. So the capacity is really emerging from the grassroots, not just to implement the program, but also to support other organizations that are implementing the program. And this is just a bit about the reach and impact of the CBOs. So right now, Badi Foundation is collaborating with 25 CBOs in 11 provinces. And in 2016, over 1,100 rural women and 2,500 junior youth participated in the CBO's educational activities. And since the initiation of the foundation's activities, over 24,000 rural women and youth have directly participated in program activities. And through their own projects and service activities, they've reached over 52,000 community members in their different environments. And as has been touched on a little bit before, areas of impact include sustainable economic projects, educational endeavors, environmental improvement, cultural enrichment, and infrastructure projects. So these are just potential areas of support or contribution. One is just to learn more about the work of the Badi Foundation and share it with others. Another that's been really wonderful is funding support, either for the CBOs or for the institutional capacity building program. And there was a dear friend in San Francisco who you might have heard about. This Kun participated in a fundraising effort that involved running a half marathon to raise funds for the foundation and the CBOs. So there's a lot of exciting things happening, but we are seeing the need for financial support and contribution, both from mainland China, but also people overseas who are interested in supporting these kinds of efforts. And the last is specialized skills. So we know that there are people with a lot of specialized skills here in Silicon Valley. So these are just a few that we've drawn on volunteers for assistance from in the past, including communication skills, like website development, things along these lines, financial management, IT. We've had volunteer photographers who've helped with documenting pictures from some of the projects. So really looking at how different people's talents can help contribute to the development of China's rural communities. So maybe now I'll just share a brief clip from a film that was prepared last year. It's not finalized yet, it's still being edited and developed, but wanted to share this just to give a little bit more of a flavor of what's happening with the CDOs and the foundation's work. So it'll be about 11 or 12 minutes. But any questions or comments before I start the film? Okay.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Are the CBOs people volunteers?
No, they are, they're provided with a budget. And that, at this stage, it comes from the Batty Foundation. So the Batty Foundation raises funds from other sources and then provides an annual operating budget to the CBOs. And so that covers their staff expenses, their office, their materials, travel, and then some of the more well-developed CBOs are now starting to raise funds from third parties. So initially, the foundation tries to provide the funding because then it gives them the space and time to focus on learning to use their program. Because fundraising can be very time-intensive work. And so they have a period of 3 to 5 years to really strengthen their program, and then gradually the foundation accompanies them to raise funds from third parties.
Is the intention to keep the CDO running on a permanent base or just for short term?
It varies. Like, it depends on how things materialize. So there have been some CBO, one of the CBOs in particular, the one you saw that picture of the 5 women, they've been operating for over 10 years now. And they were the first CBO to start. And they're reaching over 1,000 junior youth every year and have very strong relations with government. In other cases, CBOs have started and have really struggled, and for one reason or another, maybe it just didn't work out for them to continue in the long term. And so in those cases, the foundation and CDO work together to wind down the operations. But the vision is that, going back to one of the earlier points, that development is really a long-term process and requires focus on a line of action over years and years, and learning and building relationships and developing expertise. But the vision is also that gradually the CBOs will become more independent from the foundation. The hope is that they will always be part of the learning circle and sharing what they're learning and contributing, but in time, if they're able to find funding from other sources, then that frees up more funds to go to starting new CBOs.
Are your staff full-time paid, or do they have to pick up multiple jobs to support themselves?
Full-time paid.
So each person can oversee how many CBOs?
It's interesting because before, the model was more that we had quite a few staff in Beijing who were overseeing, like each of them was working with like 3 to 5 CBOs, so we had about 5 or 6 people who were working with the CBOs. But with this recent development that we have the regional groups, there's less of a need for a larger number of staff in Beijing. So now there's actually only 3 full-time staff in Beijing, one of whom is working mainly on government relations and communications, the others mainly working on financial management. And then there's a third staff who's kind of working on documenting the learning of the CBOs and kind of systematizing that. So it used to be the staff in Beijing was 12, 13, 14. It would fluctuate, but it was around that. But now it's much leaner, and a lot more of the activities happening at the grassroots. So maybe I'll share the clip and then we can have more discussion.
Turn down the lights. Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know where the switch is. Or at least half the lights, I don't know. All of them.
我们就是 帮助我们开发我们的天赋，
就是给我们带来
就是把好的传下去。
教人们怎样做人的
怎样构建一个和谐的社会。
这门课它就是一个就是爱的教育的课程，
赋予你更强的服务能力，并且提高你的品格。
赋能够让我们社区更加团结和睦。
我觉得赋能呢，其实不是给能力，我们要做的就是释放他们身上的能力。
服务就是帮助别人做他不能够做到的事情。
服务就是去帮助人家，为你们服务那种人是服务。
觉得服务就是把其他人都改善一下，改善这个社会和社区。
我觉得服务是一种发自内心的行动，而不是说你刻意去做一些什么事情，这是一种本能。我就是不求回报的去帮助别人。
我们通过服务呢，收获的是双重的目的，一方面就是我们个人能力的成长，另一方面就是说让社区和社会受益。
服务他人的时候，才是我们也很快乐。
服务别人，快乐自己。服务别人，我也快乐的，自己快乐。
答疑基金会的机构能力建设项目，很多人问我们这个项目到底是什么。2000年，我们成立了我们北京代表处之后，我们的答疑基金会代表处的员工，我们会从北京到外地，我们会直接培训农村妇女或者直接培训青少年。我们的培训的目标也是激发这些人群的潜能，坚持他们的自我发展能力。其实我们发现这样的形式是有效的，我们会寻找一些在基层的人本身，他们会有这个服务意愿，他们会有这样的学习态度，我们会支持他们建立自己的非营利社会机构在他们的家乡，然后他们可以在他们自己的老家赋能和培训农村妇女和青少年。我是2013年1月开始从事这个项目的。我们这个机构的名称呢叫泽州县新源青少年赋能发展中心。我们这个新源青少年赋能发展中心是成立于2013年的1月，到现在为止应该是有3年半的时间了。于2015年7月就正式注册为一个民办非企业单位。我们现在合作的学校呢，主要就是大丰镇中学，另外呢还有一个社区，叫3家店。也在城里边的办公室呢，我们也有一个学习小组，叫做天童之家长。到目前为止，包括学过的和正在学习的青少年，总共有900多吧。
2008年初我们有个朋友说是有一个工作是非常适合我们的，然后我们可以了解一下。我们在昆明开了一个就是小吃店吧，然后生意特别好，就是听说有这个有环境建设项目培训嘛，然后我姐就告诉我愿不愿意就是回家去做这个服务。我们机构现在开展了，已经有11个赛事，200多个人了。我们15年注册成了民办非企业单位。
西单和8单的纪律，我觉得都应该是挺好的，因为他们是同一个班主任，没有垄断。 学一些生词，然后就是先读吧，然后可能在就是上课之前，我会找好一位青少年，他就先学生好了。
其实我非常的喜欢我这个职业，就是包括我当初在高中的时候，我也特别喜欢我的这个工作，然后我也就是尽我最大的努力，把每一份工作都做好，把每一节课呢都上好。但是呢，我就是感觉到说这个教育里边呢，就需要注入一些新的东西，就是真正对学生的心灵的发展就是更有效的一些东西。所以我就是我在高中从事教育的这16年吧，这个过程中我一直在探索，一直在寻找，然后就是突然有一天，当8节的这个教材出现在我面前的时候，我就感觉到我找到了。
其实基金会我们的最核心做的事情是我们要培育当地人民的自我发展能力，自我发展能力就是我们的目标。基层社区组织 CBO 他们是一个在某一个社区、某一个来自于这个社区本身的人建立了的一个组织，但是这个组织它属于整个社区。当时就是因为我要来做这个项目嘛，我必须得离开我原来的工作单位，就是金城一中。因为当时金城一中呢，在人们看来也是一个非常好的学校，它也是一个省重点中学。但是呢，我自己觉得我的这份理想就是真的想要去就是做这个青少年赋能项目，就我觉得我特别想实现这个理想，所以呢就是说在我们原来的单位做了16年的这个英语教师之后呢，我依然还是选择了来做青少年赋能项目。就当时呢有很多的老师，然后还有我周围的一些朋友，包括我自己的家人，他们也有很多的不理解，就是你为什么从这样的一个重点中学出来，然后去做这样的一个项目，公益的项目。当时呢也是经过很多的一些，我觉得也是中间会有很多的一些挑战吧、挣扎，然后但是呢，我觉得就一步一步都克服了。就是经过这个项目，就是从刚开始做的时候，然后到现在就是已经3年多了，然后3年多来这个项目呢，就是逐渐的在发展，然后我的同事，包括我的朋友、家人，他们其实也看到了这个项目的发展，所以现在呢，他们也能逐渐的理解我为什么来做这件事情了。起初在和老师们联系的时候呢，就是老师们普遍有一个担忧，就认为，这个项目要到我们学校来开展的话，肯定是要占用我们的教学时间，在那怕影响我们的正常的教学进度。我们的校长主动的就是给大家做工作，给大家宣传这个东西，然后呢，就是我们就在初1、初2、2个年级做了试点，所以就开展了这项活动。经过1个学期的活动，接下来以后呢，就是老师们的观念和态度都有了很大的转变，所以也就更喜欢杜老师一行。所以后来呢，就是各班的班主任、各年级的主任就纷纷主动的来邀请杜老师，就希望杜老师到自己的班上、到自己的年级去开展这项活动，去搞这个就是道德赋能英语教学。
最开始当我第一次走进这个课堂的时候，受到他们的这种课堂的启发，并且我也亲自参与过这种课堂，然后我跟他们在一起做活动，特别有意思。后来我想到课堂可以有一些这个可以让孩子们更加就是感兴趣去这堂课。然后呢，我们的中考进行改革，我们的国家也在重视孩子们的能力，已经减少了大量的机械性的教育。去年的话已经有体现。完了以后呢，在我的课堂上，我在陆续，实际上我原先就有，但是陆陆续续的，后来在今年越发的，我想把这个东西加入到我的课堂里去。
就从这个杜老师工作中啊，我获得一个这个最大收获，就是爱的教育。孩子们在这个赋能课上面能够学会尊重别人，能够和大家一起团结做一个事情，这个合作，这是我所学到的。
高，它也使我们懂得服务的真正含义。这门课让我们可以去外面服务社会，也让我们懂得了一定要爱护我们的社区，爱护我们的村子。
这门课然后教给我们许多做人的道理，以及怎样实现自己的人生价值得到确认。
那确认的一个过程，我觉得，这是一种寻找自我的过程，定位自己未来的过程。上了高中之后，我们这个语文老师就是经常跟我们分享一个思想，就是我思故我在，就是在我不断的思索、不断的探索过程中，在跟周围的环境，然后跟周围就是一些不太好的现象，就是在这样的环境中不断的去改造自己的时候，你不断的思考，这样会找到你自己的存在，找到一个真正的我，这其实也是一种确认。当你自己找到真正的我，确认了自己的时候，周围的人也会确认你。
我觉得确认是我们在一件事上努力了，然后得到了别人的确认，然后我们就提高了自身的素质，也提高了对社区对别人的服务。
我觉得学了这个课程之后啊，就是以前他们可能会比较自我主义，然后现在就是更加谦卑、更加和善这样子。
女儿等大能配出来，姐姐开始等事。
是，比如就是特别是这个包容心啊，反正这些都是改变挺大的。
我在这个班上工作呢，把这个第一期的92，93的12了，很多嘞。
其实我们选择是12到15岁的青少年，我们发现这个年龄阶段是一个非常特殊的一个阶段，因为12到15岁的青少年，他们不是孩子，但是他们也不是成年人，他们在一个成熟的期间的准备的过程当中，他们开始对自己会有一些想法。所以我们觉得这是当时我们需要给12到15岁的青少年非常适合他们的教育。这个教育是道德教育、人生的教育，会帮助他们思考他们在生活当中碰到问题的时候应该怎么办。我们会帮助他们思考一下他们的生活的目标，也不仅仅是提升自己，也是可以贡献社区的发展。所以我们也发现青少年他们很喜欢有这样的教育、这样的学习的机会。
So we could either stop here, or if you would like to watch the rest, we can watch the rest. It's about, I think, we got 15 more minutes of the video. So I'm not sure how much time everyone has. Any preference?